Let me see. My next question I wanted to ask you about colorism in Latino culture, because you hear that talked about a little bit more than racism. For the viewers who may not understand that, is there colorism in Latino culture?
There's definitely colorism, and there's also racism. And I can say a little bit about what each of these things are, and then why it is that you may hear more about colorism than you hear about the actual language of racism. Right? So colorism is all about having racial meaning attributed to a color spectrum, right? So the lighter you are, the more you are viewed as intellectually superior, more culturally refined, and the darker you are, the worse that is, right? And that spectrum and those racial meanings are part of our Latin American and Caribbean backgrounds, right? We don't learn that in the US. We come in here already with it, and we learn it across generations from our families, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, etc. Right? So it's not just the recent immigrant issue, and it's not just, it's just the old people. No. It's across generations within our communities. But the reason why I say it's important to not sort of just lump what happens within Latino communities as primarily only about colorism is because, and so I kind of dig into this in the book, the manifestation, right, the acting on of racial exclusion and racism is not only about skin color, right? We tend to think of colorism as only about skin color. There are many instances, right, where someone may not be phenotypically particularly dark, right? So it's not about their color, but their hair texture, their phenotype looks more African than it does European. And that is a problem in Latino communities. Right? And that's not about the color. That's about race, right? That's about a racial understanding of what your ancestry means. And people say, oh, the one drop rule, that's just a US thing. We may not use language, right, of one drop rule, but we have actions of one drop rule within Latino communities. That is to say, little white looking girl shows up to school, but her father is a dark skinned Afro-Latino. That gets noticed, right? It's not innocuous within Latino communities. And that could be a problem for that little white appearing girl. So that's a way in which there's a silencing about the existence of one drop rule, Latino style, but it exists nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you for breaking that down. Now, I got a chance to study abroad in DR in Brazil. So when I was in DR, the school I went to, it was like one of the top schools. So like the professors and the staff and a lot of the students, like you say, they were either like light skinned or more European looking. So like when I would go to the school, I would notice the people that clean the bathroom, the people that work in the cafeteria, the security guards, they were more brown, they were more dark, but they'd be like, well, we all Dominican, so it can't be racism, So I was like, nah, I don't know. It didn't look fair to me. Like the lighter you were, the higher your pay grade was, or like you say, higher education. Let me see.
And there's a word for that too, what you were directly experiencing and observing, right? And that word is called a pigmentocracy, meaning it's across pigment and understandings of pigment, right? So you don't even have to see the dark color, but if you know somebody is from a particular region in the DR or within a particular region of Brazil, those are the blackity blacks sections. So even if you look white, knowing that you're from the blackity black section also taints you, right? In ways that, right, this is not about just about racial appearance, right? It's also about a racism, a racial understanding, right? Rooted in anti-Blackness.
Okay, let me see. I got a chance to check out one of your videos, and you were talking a little bit about some Latinos, when they come to America, they join white supremacist groups. That's something that's been going on in recent.
Yes, unfortunately. Right. So, the head of the Proud Boys and several of their members are Latinos. The violence in Charlottesville in 2017, Latinos were part of that white supremacist violence in Charlottesville as well. It is unfortunately not aberrational, right? To have Latinos as part of these groups. And people ask me oftentimes, like, but how is this possible? Latinos are discriminated against in the United States. Why would they, even want to join a white supremacist group? Well, we had echoes of this very early on when we looked at what would happen inside prisons. Right? Prisons are some of the most segregated spaces, right, that exist within the United States. And there are Black sections, white sections, Latino sections. But when the violence happens across race lines, Latinos throw in with the white supremacists. It's documented time and time again. And they are policed by other Latino inmates not to associate with Black inmates. So that understanding of, we may not be the racial elite, but we don't want to associate and we want to distance ourselves from what we already know from our cultures is problematic as far as Blackness is concerned, let alone African-American Blackness, which now gets sort of piled on top of, right? There's the Latin American racism, and then you got the U.S. racism all tying themselves together. So, the lure, to be part of a white supremacist organization is about another way of saying, you may not see me as white, but this is my way to act out my whiteness, right? But I may not appear it, or you may not, think of me in that way, but my actions now, I get to view myself, I get to think of myself as whitening myself by being part of anti-Blackness in an organizational way.